Hello and welcome to this Windhorse Publications podcast. My name is Dhammamegha and I'm your host today, and I'm also the director of Windhorse Publications. And we're a publishing company based in the UK, and we work on books on meditation, mindfulness and Buddhism. And today I'm really pleased. We've been having a conversation with Valerie Mason-John, also known under her Buddhist name Vimalasara, about a new book that's coming out in May 2024. And the book is called First Aid Kit for the Mind, Breaking the Cycle of Habitual Behaviours. And it's a small book, it's a pocketbook that is aimed to help everybody, you, me, to work with our minds when they trouble us, to work with our minds when we're triggered, to work with our minds when we're caught up in painful stories, in habits. So it's a liberating book, and I was really pleased to hear a bit more from Valerie from Vimalasara about what went into the book. We've had some really, really lovely and supportive reviews of the book, including by Gabor Mate, for example, who says it's an entertaining, succinct, and highly practical primer to help us get through the many challenging moments life has a way of throwing at us. And that's exactly what it is. So over to Vimalasara. Hi, Vimalasara.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast. Saying hello to you. You're in Vancouver today.
I am precisely on the Sunshine Coast, and it is sunny today.
Well, thank you for being here, especially while it's sunny. So we're going to talk today about your new book that'll be coming out in May globally this year, called First Aid Kit for the Mind. But before we get to the book, Windhorse published your book with Dr. Paramabandhu Groves in 2012, 8-Step Recovery, which was a book really looking at how to apply the Buddha's teachings to questions of addiction recovery. And it's had a really significant impact. So this is now 14 years later that we're going to be publishing this book. I'm just curious to know what you've been doing in your work and your life in the last 14 years that's being brought into this book.
Oh, gosh. What have I been doing? Well, I've been living in Canada all that time. In fact, the book was co-wrote with me being in Canada, and I must say it was a beautiful collaboration of co-writing together. Yeah, very, very beautiful experience working with Dr. Paramabandhu Groves. Well, I've had several books actually come out since then. I think, yes, coming to Canada, I actually co-edited the Great Black North contemporary African-Canadian poetry. And then I had my book, I'm Still Your Negro, a homage to James Baldwin, which actually came out just a couple of years ago, which was shortlisted for a couple of awards. I have had another book, I think. Yes, I can't keep up. I mean, my book, First Aid Kit for the Mind, is book number 11. In terms of personally my work has actually changed, not dramatically. In 2012, I would have been still working very much in the education system around conflict resolution and anti-bullying, and doing a lot of work with young people, training up young people to be peers and to deliver mediation, to deliver conflict resolution, and training teachers. And I still have my hand in with young people, but it's not so much. I work with the Indigenous community. We have very big Indigenous communities here where I live, and I do work with kids who are in the foster care system. But I'd say that actually the big change is that I have a private practice now. So I'm one of the founding facilitators of Dr. Gabor Mate's Compassionate Inquiry. And in fact, actually, Gabor wrote the foreword to the second edition of 8-Step Recovery, as we have a couple of editions of that. So that's how Gabor came into my life. He's a friend and a teacher. So I work very much in the compassionate inquiry community, training people over the year-long course. I also have a private practice where I have clients, and I'm also trained in internal family systems. So I really love that work, actually, that work on that one-on-one work. And I work remotely. I'd say that working remotely one-on-one is it's beautiful. Working with groups online is very different. My preference is to be back out there in a training room with groups. I also have my mindfulness-based addiction recovery training course, which I call a cousin to mindfulness-based relapse prevention. And the reason why it's called recovery course rather than relapse prevention, because it's setting up people to fail. You go in a course to say this is about relapse prevention, and you relapse, what's going to happen? You're going to feel crappy about yourself. So the emphasis is on recovery, and we acknowledge that relapse is going to happen. And when relapse happens, that's the opportunity to just be kind and loving to ourselves and pick ourselves up and move on. I do a lot of public speaking, and I do a lot of professional training. And yes, I don't know. I haven't had any babies, though.
No wonder you've got time for everything else.
Although I have said to my partner, I said, we don't have any babies, but we do have some adult dependents, which do take up one's life. Have a very close friend in her 60s who's really got quite a bad dementia and really kind of taking care.
I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about what you've been doing is I've been quite aware in working with you in the book with this first aid kit for the mind, the enormous range of resources that you're drawing on in how you're thinking about, kind of responding to working with habits of mind. Obviously, there's the deep-rooted kind of Buddhist practice and the articulation of that Buddhist practice to our lives now. But also it seems to me that you've got a very wide palette. So maybe you could say a little bit about, well, what is the first aid kit for the mind? If you were going to tell somebody about this new book that you're bringing out, how would you talk about it?
Thank you. I'd like to talk about that wide palette to begin with. I suppose I was very fortunate before I left England in being trained in adult education, and I can always just remember the training. There would be all these different things on the table for us to fidget with, and really looking at people's different learning styles, and that's really followed me. And actually just that awareness that actually, one size doesn't fit all. And more working in the trauma world, I work very much in the trauma world. And of course, addiction is one of those aspects of the trauma world. And definitely the book 8-Step Recovery really kind of placed me in the addiction world. And when I was first working in that world, it was very much just 12 steps. And very much it has to be abstinence, and harm reduction was this evil thing. And here we are in 2024, and now the question is, it's not like, are you harm reduction or abstinence? It's like, do you use psychedelics to help with addiction or not use psychedelics? And so in a way, there's so many ways to recover. Some of the work I've been doing is shamanism is shamanism training, and also breathwork training, and all of them. In fact, I laugh and I think, wow, do you really need psychedelics for the medicine? Breath is medicine, and I think coming to this book, First Aid Kit for the Mind, it really is about knowing what we already have, because often we're looking out there. It's like, where's the next best course to go, and where's the next thing to go? And actually, we do have it all here inside us. I remember many years ago coming across meditation and Buddhism in my 20s and thinking, wow, meditation, it doesn't cost anything. It's not illegal. It doesn't take up any space in your luggage. It can be with you everywhere. And also, as well, I think there's been so much emphasis on meditation and mindfulness. And we have to be aware, for some people, meditation and mindfulness isn't going to work. Or what I would say is the mindfulness that is promoted, because often mindfulness is, you got to meditate. It's all about meditating. And as we know from the Buddhist teachings, mindfulness is everything. It's absolutely everything. And how we can begin to introduce people that actually washing your dishes can be mindfulness. Having a crap on the toilet can be mindfulness. Walking your dog can be mindfulness. And so for people not to be freaked out and think, oh my God, I can't meditate, etc. Also, as well, again, we have the breath. And I talk a lot about the breath, because the breath it's so important, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing that keeps us alive. I mean, without the breath, we just wouldn't be here. And so how can we begin to become aware of the breath? I mean, everything happens in awareness, but are we aware that these things are happening? So in terms of the book, it's really looking at what we have, rather than, oh, I have to go and buy another thing, or I have to go and do another course. And I want to talk about that, because the way the book is designed, if you want to have a course, you could look at the book as a course. Actually, you could look at the book as a pack of cards and actually open it up on one page, and it will have one nugget of wisdom for you. And that's all you need. Sometimes people just need one thing to set them on the road of recovery from trauma. Also, as well, I think what's really important about the book is that it's a visual book as well. So again, for some people don't want to read a lot of text, and so some visual images. I remember one of the most beautiful books I read was a book on the Heart Sutra, and look at how, I don't want to say how dense the Heart Sutra is, but it's a complicated text, and an arrow to the heart. It was fabulous with the images and the text. And I can remember teaching it with a group of people, and there were people who really got into the images and actually could really understand through the images, where people read the text and could really understand through the text. So there are images, and I hope that they work for people. And also, as well, people, we live in a time where people have a very short bandwidth, okay? And they don't want to, it's going to take me so long to read this book, or, you want me to do this thing that's going to take a long time. Well, there are practices that are just 1 minute long. Yeah. If you want something longer, you can have a practice for 5 minutes. And if you want something even longer, then you can have a practice for 20 minutes, whatever suits your style. So it's not like you've got to do everything in the book. And I hope that it's a book that people will pick up and put it down, and pick up and put it down. It's a pocketbook as well. So that thing of, actually, it's very easy to put it in your pocket, very easy to be in your hand, and just something that, yeah, you might browse it and think, oh, I've got something from it. Maybe 6 months later, a year later, oh, let me see if there's something else in the book for me, and see if that works.
So maybe for people who, well, I mean, people won't have seen the book before they hear this podcast, perhaps. So as Vimalasara says, it's a very small pocketbook. Literally, you'd be able to fit it in your pocket. And each of the chapters has a kind of tip, something to do in case of an emergency. A lot of these, and sometimes some lists where you can write down your own reflections or think about like what's going on for you in a moment. So it's quite a sort of reaction practice based idea that you can work directly with your experience with these tips and hints and images. Sometimes it just says like stop. Sometimes it's breathe. Sometimes it's place your hand on your heart, for example. So it's very interactive in that way. It's quite unusual for us to produce a book like that. It's a kind of a new venture for us, and it's beautifully illustrated and typeset by Francesca Romano, who's a young designer that we've been working with. So, yeah, I hope people enjoy the look of it as well. So, why did you call it first aid kit? What is a first aid kit?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Dhammamegha, because often when publishers or people want you to lead a retreat, they say, have you got a title? And I don't know where my headspace was, but I can remember saying to you, Dhammamegha, oh, first aid kit for the mind. It was just something that, came out of my mouth. And then I started working on the book. And as you do, as writers often, well, for me as a writer, I have a title, and a title gets me working, writing. And then the title often changes. I can remember working with it thinking, oh, the title needs to change. I was going in some direction. And then I was Googling and I saw that it had already been advertised as a first aid kit for the mind. So I'm like, oh my God, oh no, what am I going to do? But actually, it was a really good practice, because I think if I hadn't have stuck to that title, it would have been a different book. And it really did. It gave me a structure to work with. And then also, of course, why did I call it a first aid kit for the mind? Well, you have a first aid kit for the body, and the mind is part of the body. And actually, often the body and mind seems so separate. And in a way, if we can work with the mind, it can have an impact on the body. I mean, I think people need to realize that actually our mental states can really impact the physiology of the body.
Mm. And it seems to me there's a very strong emphasis in all sorts of ways throughout this book on embodiment, like the sort of rupture between the head and the heart, and the way of bringing them back together again is through the breath and the recognition of the breath. And also, I think a lot more, I don't know, you would call it, I suppose, trauma-informed. Like the book is based on an understanding of what happens when we're triggered, and how to work with that skillfully. So that's obviously coming from your trauma experience, but maybe how does the trauma-informed work and the kind of Buddhist ideas or practices that you're drawing on, how do they work together?
Oh, thank you for that question, because in a way, if we were to decolonize the word Buddhist, I mean, the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. Okay? And, people like Thich Nhat Hanh and people like Goenka will say, you can live the Buddhist teachings but not be a Buddhist. You don't have to be Buddhist. And actually, Thich Nhat Hanh would say that the name for Buddhism is interbeing. So I think, like, if we come from that place, because as far as I'm concerned, and people have heard me say this many times, that the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, is the oldest the oldest course or program to work with addiction or to work with trauma. I mean, if you think of like the whole list of the mind states in the Abhidharma, okay, so it's that the Buddhism has always spoken about trauma. It's always been implicit in the teachings. And I think what I'm doing is just really making it explicit and making it more accessible to people more than just the Buddhists. And I think this is what happens because it's coined Buddhist or Buddhism. It's like people think, oh my God, I can't work with these teachings because it might interfere with my spiritual belief or my religious beliefs. So these teachings was for the human. It was for the human condition. In a way, what's Buddhist about suffering? What's Buddhist about craving or greed, hatred, and delusion? That is part of the human condition. So in a way, it's to me, it's like the intersectionality in this book is just bringing it into one. And it's not a Buddhist book, it's not a mindfulness book, it's a book that's really working with the human condition and working with mental states.
Yeah. And one of the things about this book is also that it's quite explicit about kind of social trauma as well as sort of an individual trauma. We're not only talking about individual states sort of greed or hatred or delusion, but we're also talking about racial oppression, the embodiment and the different forms it takes, how we deal with kind of our location in the world and the hurt or lack of self-love, lack of self-care. All of these things that are broadly in the trauma field are just woven into this text. The first aid kit that we're responding to, the range of suffering we're responding to with this book is wide.
Yeah, we are, in a way we are interconnected. If you think of trees in a way, we could think, oh, trees are so individual, but yet the roots underneath are so connected. And we as humans, we may think we're individual, but actually we are so connected and interconnected. And of course, it's like if we change, then our world changes and it has an impact on people around us. I mean, I've seen that for myself, in terms of how I change has an impact on my world around me and has an impact on people. And it might not be, I think this is it. I think sometimes when people do this work that they're hoping that people will change. They don't want to do the change. They're hoping that people will change, but actually when we change, we won't be so activated by people around us, and we will be able to be around those people in a different way, which I think is that's the miracle in a way. Really, the miracle isn't other people changing in our lives. The miracle is that we change so that we have the bandwidth and we can be around these people without not being a doormat or a dumping ground. So it's not that. Yeah, we learn to take care of ourselves and love ourselves and to have our heart open.
And that's the image on the front of the book, isn't it? This great big beautiful red heart on this bright yellow background. And yeah. This is the first aid kit, the work. Is this book only for people who are in the recovery and addiction space?
Oh, absolutely. No, it's for anybody. I would say if always people say, well, you have to have a category. The category I will put is for people who are spiritually bypassing.
What does that mean?
There are so many people who are wanting enlightenment. The one in enlightenment. And I always think one of the great teachings of Prince Siddhartha was that when he, sat beneath the Bodhi tree and vowed, he didn't vow to find enlightenment. He vowed to find an end of suffering, which is just so different, isn't it? If he had vowed to find enlightenment, well, bliss, 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 bliss. But actually, as we know from that story, that vow to find an end of suffering, he had to face his suffering. So in his spiritual bypassing, that often we don't want to look at the suffering. We don't want to look at the difficult stuff. We don't want to work with that. We want to be in these blissful states. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I know for myself that I did a lot. I mean, obviously, I still do some bypassing now, but when I was first on this path, it was all about being in blissful states. And I needed that because I'd never experienced such happiness and contentment before in my life, because I had such a traumatic background. And so I wanted that. But actually, what was so interesting is nothing much was changing. So again, I just came across a quote from Einstein who says something like, that with ethics doesn't work if you're not feeling uncomfortable. The practice of ethics really is that you experience being uncomfortable. So in a way, it's like I always say that wisdom or insight is bittersweet, isn't it? It's bitter because there is this discomfort, but there's this sweetness because something opens up. So coming back to spiritual bypassing, it's not paying attention to some of the trauma or dysfunction that we've had in our lives. It's like, oh, I don't want to look at that, and it's like everything's wonderful. So yeah. And for anybody who wants to change, anybody who wants to change, it's who's the book for? It's a book for me. I think I say that, why am I writing this book? This is another book for me. Am I living and breathing some of the things that I share in the book? So the book is for me.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Vimalasara. I'm really looking forward to the book getting out there and being for, all of us. I've really enjoyed working with you on it and sort of exploring the material. It's one of the wonderful things about my job is that I'm kept I'm kept in contact with the Dharma in these ways as we work on these books. So I just wanted to say thank you for what you've written and what you've brought to the book, and to wish you well with it.
Well, thank you for seeing the potential in the material and for saying a big yes to publishing it. So thank you.
Windhorse Publications is part of the Triratna Buddhist community, and this podcast is sponsored by Future Dharma Fund, a Buddhist fundraising charity which helps fund Dharma projects across the world, including ours. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider donating to them to help them fund current and future projects like ours. You can find out more about Windhorse Publications by going to our website.